Okay, good evening, guys, and welcome to our 10th session for this evening. Our topic is about research variables. So, before anything else, let's have our objectives. Number one, discuss research variables and its implementation. Number two, value the importance of research variables and its implementation. And number three, understand research variables and its implementation. So, we have here variable and attribute. To understand better your variables, you must understand variables and attributes. So for variables and attributes, this refers to the quality of an object. So that object must be a person or a thing or etc. And then attributes are closely related to variables, no? A variables is a logical set of attributes, so they are interchangeable. And variables can vary. For example, be high or low, no? So high or low or high is determined by the value of the attribute. And in fact, the attribute could be just the word low or just the word high. Now, while the attribute is often intuitive, the variable is a personalized way in which the attribute is represented for further data processing. So, in data processing, data are often represented by the combination of items. These items are objects organized in rows or multiple variables such as organized in columns. So the value of each variable basically is statistically vary or that depends upon the distributed factor across the variable's domain. So take note, the word domain, this is very important. A domain is a set of all possible values that a variable is allowed to have. So the values are ordered in a logical way and must be defined for each variable. So domain can be bigger or smaller. So it represents also domain can represent also your attribute. So the smallest possible domains have those variables that can only have two values, also called binary or dichotomous variable. So dichotomous means you only have two options or choices. It's either high or low, left or right, up and down, smaller, bigger. Basta opposite, guys. That is dichotomous. Dichotomous or binary. So semantically, greater precision can be obtained when considering an object's characteristics by distinguishing attributes. So the characteristics that can be attributed to an object depends upon the trait that it has. Meaning to say, a trait is a characteristic that are inherent to the object. So mo day characteristic na ang naturalesa kaisa ka object or ana nga attribute. So ginatawag man daa nga traits. So for dependent and independent variables, these are just the variables wherein you can do it in the statistical modeling and experimental sciences. Pero guys, in capstone and technological developmental research, we are also manipulating our own set of variables, no? So most of the time, this medyo marayo gawa daya na sa descriptive just because ang inyo tanan is developmental in nature. At the same time, you're going to consider technological research. So dependent variables receive this name because in an experiment, their values are studied under the supposition or demanded that they depend on some law or by rule. So like for example, mathematical function, no? So on the values of other variables, it means to say the dependent variables depends on the independent variables. That's why na buol na ang ngaran nga dependent variable kay naga-depende siya or ang ana nga effect that depends upon the independent values. So meaning to say, kung maglain ang value ka independent variable, malain man ang value ka dependent variable. So muda usually ang dependent variable ninyo are your inputs, no? And our independent variable are your outputs. I'm sorry, suli. independent variable ang input, ang dependent variable ninyo ang output. So meaning to say, ang output ninyo naga-depend sa input ninyo kung ano yung i-input ninyo, guys. So duman pa ninyo IPO diagram ninyo sa conceptual framework. So umuday agwa na. While your independent variable in turn are not seen as depending on other variables in the scope of the experiment in question. So in this sense, some common independent variables are time, space, density, mass, fluid, flow rate, and previous values of some observed value of interest. So like example is human population size to predict future values. So if that of the two, it is always that the dependent variable whose variation is being studied by altering inputs, also known as regressors in statistical context. So what is the difference between your dependent variable and independent variable? So in an experiment, guys, any variable that you manipulate, clarification, that can be called an independent variable. These are the models that experiment tests that the effect of the independent values have on the dependent values. So sometimes if their influence is not of direct interest, independent variables may be included for other reasons, such as an account for their potential confounding effect. So there are a lot of cause and effect value attribute that you can make on dependent variable and independent variable. Basta lantawan lang ninyo nga ang dependent values are oftentimes be dependent to the independent values. And changes occurs whenever those values change also. So the effect must be depende sa problem or depende sa title ninyo. However, ang most adverse effect na kadang duwa nga variable nga dya is that ang direct nga effect, meaning to say, kung maglain ng values ang independent variable, malain man ang dependent variable. Or the other way around, which is ang indirect effect. Nga, if ever the independent variable change, the dependent variable change pero opposite. So, modegwa na. It's either pareho ang effect niya or reversible ang effect. Ang tawag kada bala sa mathematics guys directly proportional kag indirectly proportional. So mo agwa na. So in terms of mathematics, guys, you can see there the variables that are set on our example. You have the coefficient and constant. So the coefficient there is the ever-changing value of any variable, and the constant is the precise amount or the precise object. Kung sa immovable object, meaning to say fixed na siya. So in our second example here, the variable is a letter that represents an unknown number. So 1 plus x is equivalent to 3. So x is the variable. So it is the letter that represents an unknown number. Next example is that the variables are placeholders for unknown values. Placeholders means temporary placement, whereas usually denoted by letters or symbols. Okay. So other variables, these are your extraneous variables. So remember, extraneous variables ninyo has a indirect effect between the two. Pero ang ana nga effect is co-founding. So meaning to say, kung co-founding siya, this means that it doesn't really adhere to the effect of the changing of the variables. Meaning to say, it has an hindi kamukambal nga direct effect or indirect effect. Pero nang hurubaton bala guys nga when it happens, it happens. So sometimes your extraneous variables can be a catalyst or the value which significant has a significant change. However, significant changes are only measured by statistical values. So the direct effect for this will be ang inyong anugid, ang inyong independent kag dependent variable. Pero ang extraneous ninyo, it helps to the development of the variable or it doesn't help to the development of the variable. So you cannot say that it's stationary, and you cannot say that it's moving, it's changing. But then, whatever kind of values or variables that you can put there, all you have to do is to maintain or observe the output of the changes. So, amo the guys, you must be vigilant enough to distinguish which kind of values are you going to represent for each of the variables. So, hindi ka mo magsala, hindi matingala, or hindi ka mo ano bala, mag-conclude lagi. So, panumdumon ninyo nga yung variable ninyo must be precise, and these are the coherent statements that you can produce so that you can make an assumption or a decision for your values. Okay? For your activity number 13, guys, it's called variables 113. So you're going to refer to dependent and independent variables. So you're going to make your variables of your study, and you are going to make an online and offline software provided it will be copy pasted to any word processor. So you're going to convert it to PDF and save it as your activity number 13. So as I've said sa past naton nga ano guys, nga ang tamdan ninyo ka variable ninyo, no. As activity ninyo nga daya, butang nyo ano yung title ninyo. Then you are going to put there your dependent variable and then your independent variable. So your dependent variable, guys, is makita ninyo sa input ninyo, output ninyo. Output gali na I stand corrected, sa output ninyo sa IPO diagram, sa output niyo makita ang dependent. Ang independent variable amo daya input ninyo, guys. So malaan nyo, nagadepende ang output ninyo sa input ninyo. So it means nga kung ano yung makita ninyo sa input nyo, amo da independent variable nyo. So amo da isulat ninyo, guys, in paragraph form. Then, kung ano yung output ninyo, muna yung dependent variable ninyo. Okay? So, i-describe ninyo in a sentence, in a paragraph form. So, one or two paragraphs will be enough basta ma-describe ninyo kung ano yung variable ninyo nga makita to ya. So, kung duro yung variable ninyo, isa-isa ako nyo da ka-describe in paragraph form. So, mo yung activity number 13 ninyo. Okay? So, cooperate with your group mates. And na mo, hindi ka mo ka-decide or hindi ka mo ka-obra ka activity nyo nga dyan kung hindi nyo pag-istoryahan nyo dependent kang independent variable kaya disseminate ka na dahil tiyan mo dahil ng ano, kada group bilain lain yung title din nyo. So expectedly. Pero kung group mates ka mo, pareho in your answer. Okay? So our code of the day, guys, is what is the variable which has an indirect effect to both independent and dependent variables. So amo day katapusan nato naging discuss to karon nga gabi. So ad astra per sapientia, it means to the stars through knowledge. So thank you, guys. And thank you, guys, for attending our lecture for this evening. I will activate the code of the day to lad para hindi ta malipat. Please answer this until 10 p.m. karon sa gabi. So, do you have any questions, guys, regarding our activity for this evening or for this week? Do you have any clarification?
Why, sir?
Okay, sige. So, please continue to please continue to what's this gani? Be vigilant enough and um, continue to interact with your group mates so that you can produce your activity for the ano. So thank you, guys, for attending, and mayong gabi gid sa tanan. Okay, shout out kay Randel, kay Sheila May, kay Vincent, kay Justin nga nagwa, kay
Yes
Ella
po,
May,
sir.
kay Pearl Joy. Good evening gid sa tanan.
Mayang gabi man, sir.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you for attending.
Good eve, sir.
If you have any questions, pagid, if you don't want to ask, you can actually ask questions sa PM. Okay? Okay, so salamat, guys. Thank you and good evening.